Chapter 13. Life Goes On. Another week had gone by. John had just finished another workout with his nemesis, Jean-Paul, yesterday. He wasn't a bad guy. John had a hard time accepting that Jean-Paul and Jeanette had engaged in an extramarital affair, one that had involved him. But that wasn't going to deter him. He had long ago accepted all that was left for him was his family. His children reminded him of that every day. It was just another day for John. He had gotten to work early. He had checked on his crews. All was going well. He had to get more work, but that didn't bother him. He knew it was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. That wasn't on his mind, though. Daniela was. She was beautiful, tall and lean, long shapely legs. She was certainly easy to look at. She was nonetheless almost 10 years his younger. He wondered if she was ready to settle down as much as he was. She would go out almost every Saturday evening to a nightclub. She would dance all night long. He spent his Saturday evenings at home with the kids, but he did immensely enjoy himself when he went out with her. He wondered if he enjoyed the venue or just the opportunity to be with her. He was infatuated and frightened at the same time. He worried if she was ready, as he was, to start a new life together. He was 10 years older and at a different stage of his life. I've been married. I have 2 children. I spend as much time as I can with them. Normally, full of self-confidence, he was reminded how he felt when he had first met Jeanette. The same way. He was nervous. He was unsure whether his feelings were being reciprocated. He didn't like the doubts he was having. But if he were to be realistic, it wasn't a lot working in his favor. Daniela isn't ready to end up with an instant family. John did, nonetheless, have some things working in his favor. He was a good-looking guy, and he had his own successful business, but these things had become routine for him. Sure, JT's had just gone through a rough patch recently, but the firm had survived it and was prosperous once again. In fact, he was looking for new office space. He wondered how she was doing, so called. "Hi, Daniela. It's John." She looked down at her watch. She wasn't at all expecting his call. "Hi, John. What do I owe this call to?" "I was just thinking about you, about us, and I thought I'd give you a call." "That's nice. I was wondering if you have any plans for lunch. I thought we could go out and grab something together." "That would be nice. I can come by and pick you up shortly after noon. Would that work?" "Yes," she answered excitedly, with a broad smile on her face. "I have the truck today. I hope you don't mind." "Not at all. I'll see you then. Bye." Daniela hadn't at all expected his call. It made her happy. She had her own doubts, but she doubted whether she had what he was after, and why he was after anything so soon after Jeanette's passing. With some reflection, her smile stayed. The more she thought about it, the happier she got. He had introduced her to the children. In her mind, that had to be a big step for him. She was helping him select a new office. It told her he was serious. He was doing all the right things in her mind. She couldn't ignore the facts that he was older. He had been married before. He had children. And he had his own business. She had evaluated the situation before she decided to pursue him. She found him handsome, successful, and importantly to her, confident. She needed a shower, so she turned quickly and went to the bathroom, still smiling. John pulled his truck quickly into Daniela's apartment. He opened the door and got out. He hadn't fully digested his feelings. He knew he was happy. In fact, he was overjoyed. He hadn't pinpointed his happiness to the fact that he was seeing Daniela again. This would be the second time this week. Could have been JT's had turned the corner and was on the way to providing him with even more than he was accustomed to. It could have been finding a new office. Could have been the fact that he started his workouts. In all probability, all these things combined made him happy. Needless to say, John was in a good mood. Daniela answered the door and threw her arms around him, giving him a loving kiss. He hugged her and lifted her off the ground, her feet dangling in the air. He swung her from side to side, smiling all the while. "I love you," she whispered in his ear. What did she say? She said, "I love you." He gently let her slide to the floor. He hadn't expected that. It caught him off guard. She said she loves me. It made him happy. But his response was slow in coming. She said she loves me. I love you too. They squeezed one another even more. They kissed. Are you ready to go? Let me get my coat. Do I need boots? I don't think so. It's pretty clear out there. We'll be in the truck most of the time anyway. Where are we going? I thought we'd go to the keg. They've got a wide variety. That'd be nice. Okay, let's go. They went out of her place and got in the truck. Pulling out of her parking lot, they drove to the keg. Daniela had shown him her hand. She had laid it on the line. But that was how she felt. She knew it was a risky thing to do and decided to take the risk. She knew she was blessed with very good looks. And if he thought about it, there weren't too many men that found themselves in his position. A 22-year-old bombshell just told him she loved him. He smiled almost all the way to the keg. Neither of them said anything of relevance as they drove along the Kingsway to the restaurant. They were saving a more in-depth discussion for lunch, when it could be given the attention it deserved. It also gave them time to get their thoughts together. Sitting at a table for two on the balcony, they looked endearingly at one another over their glass of wine. Daniela, you caught me off guard in your apartment. I thought I might, but that's how I feel, and one of us had to break the ice. So I decided I would. I'm really happy you did, because I was having the same thoughts. You have children. You've been married before. And it hasn't been that long. I didn't know if you were ready. I knew I am, so I did it. I'm glad you did. It doesn't bother you that I'm older? I have 2 kids. It doesn't bother me that you're older. I mean, come on. You're in your early 30s. You're young yet. I know you have kids. I've met them. I know you have. That should have told you that I'm serious. It did. I know your kids mean the world to you. That's why I broke the ice. You're wonderful. You obviously thought about all these things. I have, and I know you're the one for me. It's going to take time, John said, with his fingers pressed to his forehead. I've thought about everything. I have more time than you have, she said, smiling. As long as you're sure, I am. Let's take it slow. We have time. Your kids are important to me, too. We'll make sure they're all right. It's very important to me. You must want your own kids, too. One day, I'd like my own. You don't mind that they'll have a stepbrother and stepsister? Not if they're yours, she said, smiling seductively. Johnny and Tammy have had a horrible time. They lost their mother. I'm glad that they're young. They have a better chance in dealing with it. Doesn't have to affect them their entire lives. I don't know what impact that will have on them. I'll leave that to you. I'll be there for them, but replacing their mother is not one of them. Nobody can replace your mother. Nobody. You wouldn't have known that what he had just heard made him enormously happy. The expression on his face hadn't changed. He looked over at her. He said solemnly, "That you feel that way really pleases me, because I agree with what you just said. I'll bring them along slowly. They'll like you. Who wouldn't? It might require patience on your part, especially at the beginning. That doesn't bother you?" Not knowing it was music to his ears, she answered, "No. The well-being of your children is of paramount importance, and I wouldn't do anything to jeopardize that." He grit his teeth, and his look went to the floor. He already had. He wasn't at all happy with what he had done. John returned to the office after lunch. Daniela and he had arranged to meet tomorrow and look at office space in the morning. He looked at the time and decided to go home. If the kids weren't there, they would be soon. The thought of Jeanette in her last days was still very vivid in his mind. He had killed their mother. He hadn't been caught, but he knew what he had done. Result of that was that Johnny and Tammy no longer had a mother. Maybe I was too rash. The kids. He shook his head in exasperation, reaching into his pants pocket to get the keys to the truck out. Coming through the front doors, John called out, "Johnny, Tammy, Maria, I'm home." "Hi, Daddy," came from downstairs. Kids were down there watching television. "Hi, John." Maria's voice came from the kitchen. "Hi, Maria. I'm going to fix myself a drink. How are you?" "I'm fine, thank you." You're home a little bit early today. That's okay. You can eat with the kids if you'd like. What's for supper? Potatoes, beans, and pork chops. Will that be enough? Sounds good. I'm going to put the chops on now. Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. Okay. I'm just going to sit at the table with my drink. I hope you don't mind. Of course not. Relax. You just got home. John didn't very often eat with the children. They wanted to eat at 5 or shortly thereafter. John usually got home at 6, but today he was an hour earlier. He was looking forward to eating with the children. This would give him another chance to see how the children felt about Daniela. He had asked them before, but wasn't happy with how they had responded. In fact, he didn't feel he got a response at all. The kids had obfuscated the issue best they could. They hadn't wanted to talk about it. John didn't blame them. They had only met her for the first time. He felt he could get them to open up more this time. It had been over a week for his relationship to sink in. He had made sure to bring their relationship up a number of times since then. He was hoping they would open up more to him this time. I'm going to set the table now. The kids must be getting hungry. I'll move into the living room. And John picked up his drink and went to the couch. Kids, come upstairs and wash your hands. Dinner is ready. Johnny and Tammy turned the television off and came upstairs, washed their hands, and sat at the table. Are you eating with us today? Johnny asked as he sat down. I thought I would, if I'm allowed. Of course you are. Okay then, let's all sit at the table. Maria, I'll clean up. You might as well go home for the day. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. You come in early enough. Today is the day you get to leave a bit early. If you're sure, then I'll be going. See you tomorrow. All right, bye. Maria left. John and the children sat around the kitchen table. Tammy, can I get you a plate? Yes, please. Hand me your plate. Thanks. Potatoes? Beans? I'll cut your pork chop for you. Did you want some gravy? Yes, please. Only on my potatoes. Johnny, John said, handing him the potatoes when he was finished serving Tammy. This was unusual for their children. Their father was home during the work week having dinner with them. The three of them were busy eating when John asked, What did you think of Daniela? Johnny took the lead. She seems very nice. I think so, but I always want you to remember your mother. We will. But the children were busy eating. John had started the conversation, but wanted to get to the bottom of what the children were thinking, so said, I thought the four of us could do something this weekend, like skating. We only have about a month left. Would you like that? Yes, they screamed. That would be fun. I haven't asked Daniela yet, but I'm sure she'll think it's a great idea. I'll check with her tomorrow. We'll go to Lake Ramsey, okay? Yes, they answered. The kids weren't exactly forthcoming on their thoughts about Daniela, but he didn't expect them to be. They were in a difficult situation. Their mother, and the memory of her, were still relatively fresh on their minds. It had been only about half a year. He couldn't expect more, and he didn't. He knew he had to walk softly and take it a little bit at a time, and he was willing to do that. The kids had agreed to go skating. Daniela was going to be delighted. Putting utensils on his plate, Johnny jumped out of his seat, saying, "I'm going to get our skates out. Take your sister. I'll clean the dishes. Come on, Tammy. Let's go. We'll have some potato chips for a treat later on. Would you like that?" "Yes," they answered excitedly. John always worried that they would fall down the stairs, but they never seemed to. He was pleased. He had accomplished another goal, subject to Danielle's approval, but he wasn't at all concerned about that. She would jump at the opportunity. She had convinced him of that at lunch. All in all, it was a good day for John. He had a nice lunch with Daniela. They had discussed how they would move forward, not in the most ideal way, anything but, in fact. New office space was on the agenda for tomorrow. Children were actually excited about going skating with Daniela. In just one day, a lot had been accomplished. He had to keep reminding himself to move slowly. JT's office wasn't at all busy at this time in the morning. For most of the day, in fact. The crews were on the jobs and all was going well. They were scheduled, and John had 2 unsolicited phone calls for potential indoor work just yesterday. He wanted to go by and see the houses so he could prepare an estimate. He wanted to do that today. He planned to do it after he and Daniela went out this morning to look at more office space. Oh yeah, I have to go to Lifestyles too. I'll get at least one of those houses done, he thought. Sitting at his desk, it was shortly after 8. He'd wait half an hour before calling Daniela. It was too early yet. He had to give her time to wake up. She had made appointments to see 3 potential offices. It figured it would take a couple of hours. They were all nearby. Even if it took a bit longer, he was sure he could fit a visit to one of the houses in before he had to go work out. He would play it by ear. All he had to do was pick the one he was sure about visiting and call them to arrange it. He'd use his cell for the other. He wanted to take Daniela to lunch too, but that would have to be his lowest priority. Half an hour later, he called Daniela and arranged to pick her up in his truck, again, in an hour. No sooner than he had pulled into her parking lot, she came out of the front door and over to his truck. She got in the passenger side. "Good morning," she said, getting in. "Good morning. How are you today?" "I'm fine." Keeping the things he had to do on his mind, he asked, "Would you like to go skating on Ramsey Lake on Saturday with the kids?" A big smile came to her face and she answered, "Of course I would. That's great. How did you manage that?" "Just made the offer. I knew you would say yes." Reaching into her purse, she took a piece of paper out. "I've made appointments with 3 places. I said we would come by sometime this morning. None of them had a problem with that, so we have some flexibility. There's one on Kathleen, one on Notre Dame, and one not too far from here, on Mackenzie. Where do you want to go first?" "Let's go to Mackenzie. It's a newly renovated building just across from Sudbury High. You'd probably best to park on the side streets nearby." "Okay, let's go," John truthfully added. "Daniela, I really appreciate this. Your efforts have saved me a lot of time." "No problem. It has been my pleasure. I want to be involved with your business any way I can." "Thanks," John said, smiling. The building was indeed newly renovated. There wasn't anybody in it yet. The ground floor was going to be used for offices, and the upper floors were going to be condominiums. John liked the neighborhood. Although it wasn't very far from his current office, it wasn't on Kathleen, and therefore had a more residential feel to it. The second one they visited was only a few doors from JT's, and the last one they visited was a small office in a mall on Notre Dame. John looked down at his watch and asked, "Would you like to go to lunch?" "Yes, I would." "We'll have to be fast. I don't have a lot of time. But there's this place on Notre Dame we can be in and out of in no time. Would you like to go there?" Leaning over to kiss him, she said, "I'd go anywhere with you." His eyes widened, and with a grin on his face, he asked, "Anywhere?" and chuckled. "We can talk about the places. I'd like to know what you think." They had a quick lunch together and discussed what they felt about the spaces they had seen. They both agreed that the one on Mackenzie was ideal. It was newly renovated. JT's was going to be one of the first tenants, but if you planned to keep it for 10 years, it was by far the best. The other ones were cheaper, but not cheaper enough to make a difference. The decision was made, so they went back to the place on Mackenzie and signed a 5-year lease. The lease would automatically be renewed in 5 years unless JT's decided to move. This suited John fine. John dropped Daniela off at her home and went to the one house he had arranged earlier in the day. He would do the other tomorrow. They wanted new counters and cupboards in the kitchen and wanted to replace the floor. They also wanted their 2 bathrooms refinished. After John took some measurements, he excused himself and promised an estimate early next week. He was going to bring it by himself. The owners of the home were happy with his diligence. He hadn't wasted any of their time and was going to drop the estimate off, painless so far, they thought, as John made his way out the side door to his truck. His office wasn't far, so he decided to stop by and check on the crews before going to Lifestyles. He barely had enough time in his office to check on his crews, but he managed. It was 2:15 as he pulled into Lifestyles. He rushed through the front doors and went to the change room. He glanced at his watch and found out he still had 5 minutes. He sat down on the bench and let his arms fall to his side, where they hung for 30 seconds. He stretched his arms and began to change. Jean-Paul was standing by the mats with his arms folded when John exited the change room. John walked over and greeted him. "Are you all set for today?" And without waiting for an answer, Jean-Paul added, "I thought we'd start with some stretches today, like we've been doing." "Sounds good." John went through his routine with Jean-Paul. It took him just over an hour. His workouts were getting 5 minutes shorter each time he went. He figured he had them down to as short of time as possible. It had to stop somewhere. The workout took place largely in silence. Jean-Paul would bark instructions at John as needed, but this was getting second nature to John, so even the frequency of his barking had decreased. Well, that's it for today. You might want to do some stretching and cool down. What are you doing after I cool down? I was planning on going home afterwards. My 5 o'clock canceled. Would you like to get a coffee? We can get one in the lobby. I'll buy. Okay. See you there in about 30 minutes. What am I doing? He had no idea. He had just invited the man his wife had cheated on him with for a coffee. I must be nuts, he thought. While John showered and changed, he decided he would only use the opportunity to get to know Jean-Paul better. He would stay away from any mention of Jeanette and what had happened to her. He was going to pretend she never existed. He was going to treat the opportunity to get to know his trainer better. That's all. The two men had shared their coffee together, and not once did the conversation include any mention of Jeanette. John was visibly relieved. He had become more animated as he went. They enjoyed themselves and felt they knew one another better. John had no idea what had gotten into his mind when he had invited Jean-Paul. His feelings for Jeanette had gone downhill ever since she admitted to what she was doing. That was 7 months ago. John's feelings were certainly not there when she finally succumbed to the death camas and it was over. In fact, when he thought, or was reminded about it these days, the only emotion he had was anger. Is there something more to what I'm doing? He didn't know, but it became clearer to him. John had completed his first full week of training. He had shared the coffee with Jean-Paul, too. The two men were getting to know one another better and better with each workout and coffee they shared. Even while John was training, Jean-Paul was much more open with him since they had first shared coffee. Kids. John waited for them to respond. I'm going to get Daniela in the Audi. Then I'll come back and get you. I'll be gone for about half an hour, okay? The children were excited about going skating. They were happy that Daniela was going too. They didn't know her very well, but she had left an impression on them. They felt she was kind, caring, very pretty, and perhaps most importantly, could be a friend. Although neither Daniela nor John had any idea about what the kids felt, she was off to a very good start. John pulled into Daniela's apartment building as it was starting to become a routine for her. She was ready in the front lobby with her skates slung on her shoulders. She wore a toque, mittens, and woolen scarf wrapped around her neck. She looked warm. She looked appropriately dressed. She smiled as she skipped to the car. She smiled as she got in. Once seated, she leaned over and kissed him. "Hi," she said sweetly. "Hi. Are you ready? I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I know it's the first time I'll be spending any time with the kids, so I'll be careful. I promise. I won't come on too strong. I think it will go well. The kids are looking forward to it. It'll be fun." They drove by the house to pick up the children. John hadn't arranged for the neighbor's kid to come over. He didn't feel it was necessary. He was only going to be gone for half an hour. John and Daniela went inside and made sure the kids would be warm enough. Deciding they were, they all piled into the car and left for the lake. It was questionable whether they should have driven or walked. John decided they would use the car more for convenience than anything else. The ice rink was only a 10-minute walk. John parked in the parking lot, and they still had a 5-minute walk. He looked over his shoulder at his home and shook his head in disbelief, deciding that next time they would walk. They sat on the side of the rink, putting their skates on. John helped Johnny, and Daniela helped Tammy. They had become good friends after Daniela extended her hand to Tammy to cross Paris Street. This gesture had garnered a lot of trust. Johnny noticed this too. So did John. Tammy's wholehearted acceptance of Daniela brought him more happiness than she could possibly have known. It delighted Daniela too. Adults 3, kids 1 would have been how a scoreboard read if score was being kept track of. That left only Johnny to win over, and the day was young. Daniela and John smiled at one another knowingly. The four of them made their way to the ice once their skates were firmly put on. Out of the three of them, Daniela was the worst at skating. Tammy wasn't far behind. Being as young as she was, she hadn't been out skating that many more times than Daniela. Tammy did have youth on her side. Her inexperience was accompanied by enthusiasm and a lack of fear. Daniela's inexperience wasn't advantaged by these traits. Instead, the traits that Daniela was struggling with was a definite abundance of caution and a complete understanding of the consequence of falling. Johnny, although not an accomplished skater, he was competent. John was the expert as far as skating went. He had obviously grown up playing hockey. Danielle and Tammy held hands. Their confidence grew with each stride. After about 10 minutes, they looked far more experienced than they were, but kept holding hands anyway. John and John Jr. were much more comfortable and skated around the clean surface in a much more relaxed fashion. They didn't worry too much about the girls and strode along the ice. Although the guys seemed oblivious to the girls' plights, they weren't. Both of them kept the corner of their eye peeled out for them. If one of them were to fall, John or John Jr. would immediately be there offering their help. They had circled the rink a number of times when Daniela suggested to Tammy, "Would you like to have a hot chocolate?" "Yes, please." "Follow me," Daniela said, leading her to a small hut that sat on the frozen lake. Danielle seated Tammy at one of the outdoor picnic tables sprinkled around the hut on the frozen lake. Soon, John and Johnny joined Tammy at the table. "Should I get 4 of them?" Daniela shouted back at them. John answered in a loud voice, "Yes, please." Daniela came back with 4 steaming cups of hot chocolate and put them on the table more or less positioned so that each of them had one. Johnny, Would you like one? Daniela asked. Yes, please. Here you go, Daniela said, sliding a hot chocolate in front of him. Looking at Daniela, John asked, Are you enjoying yourself? I am, she answered, smiling. Let's finish this, and we'll go around a couple of more times, John suggested. The children were keen, and in their excitement blurted out, Okay, and then hurried off, leaving John and Janice alone. They smiled at one another. Neither one of them needed to tell the other how they thought it was going. They both knew it was going well. Daniela was making enormous strides in befriending Tammy. She even had the feeling that the young girl liked her, and if Tammy accepted her, it was only a matter of time before Johnny accepted her too, because he was at the stage when his younger sister meant the world, or even more than the world, to him, and he would do anything to protect her. He rarely ever showed this. He was embarrassed by it, but it was a natural reaction for him, and from time to time, it came out. John held his hand out. They were going to go around the ice hand in hand. They knew it wouldn't be long before this was noticed, and decided to do it anyway. Off they went, and sure enough, Johnny and Tam noticed almost immediately. The four of them had been skating for a couple of hours when John said, I've had enough for one day. What about you kids? They answered, with the sparkle having gone out of their eyes, and their smiles temporarily having disappeared from their faces. Okay, we'll go around one more time, and then we'll go home. We can have a barbecue tonight. Yes, 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 the children answered. They were excited. They didn't often have a barbecue in the middle of winter. They finished skating and went home. The children were instructed to put their skates away and immediately settled down on the couch to watch television. John and Daniela stayed upstairs wearing smiles ear to ear. The afternoon had been successful. If Daniela didn't have their entire acceptance of being their father's girlfriend, she almost had it. The rest of the evening would only make the bond stronger.